Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening to us from. My name is Veronica Barney, and this is episode 2 of my spiritual podcast in English. And today I have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful guest of honor, my husband, who has gladly accepted with his little twinkle in the eye to be part of this episode today, where I wanted to kind of continue the podcast in English that I started. Most of my spiritual content is in Spanish, and lately we have been getting a lot of requests for content in No, you're not gonna say anything. Okay. He's just gonna leave me in the dark, guys. We have been getting a lot of requests to do some content in English, and I was like, wow, that would be such a great idea. And we did an episode, the previous one with my best friend and Luis, and it was a really great episode. But I wanted to make it something monthly. I wanted to commit to doing it, and I went through 3 months of surgery and recovering. I had an ankle reconstruction, and so that took me out of doing much of anything for a while. And so finally now I'm recovering, thank God. And I'm like, okay, this is the time, let's do this. And I wanted to just make it basic and not so basic, but just open for us to share our experience of A Course in Miracles, which is the teaching that my podcasts are centered around, because that is my spiritual practice, but also just the general principles that apply to spiritual practices and how they're so important in our lives. And I'm just so happy to be doing this. So thank you, baby. Thank you for accepting.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. How can I say no to those sparkling, beautiful eyes?
Oh.
But I like what you had said before we started was, despite the million things that we've got going on and all our to-dos, this is an opportunity to help and to give, but also to serve us and reinforce what we've come to learn about the Course of Miracles. So, thank you.
Yeah, it was so crazy because last night, we weren't really sure how we were going to go about this podcast, and I woke up, I think it was like 2 in the morning, and I was meditating, and then I opened up the Course and I started reading this beautiful section, and I came to this passage that just like brought me to tears, and I was like, oh my God, yes, that is the whole reason of why I love the Course so much. So I'm going to share it with you. And it says, there is a light that this world cannot give, yet you can give it as it was given you. And as you give it, it shines forth to call you from the world and follow it. For this light will attract you as nothing in this world can do, and you will lay aside the world and find another. This other world is bright with love, which you have given it, and here will everything remind you of your Father and His Holy Son. Light is unlimited and spreads across this world in quiet joy. And just this part where it says, and you will lay aside the world and find another, and this light will attract you as nothing in this world can do. It was just like, wow. Because I just remembered how, throughout my life, so I came to the Course in Miracles, which, by the way, for those that don't really know much about the Course, we'll just say that it's an individual spiritual practice that is not married with any religion, with any kind of external expression or ritual. It's literally a mental practice which is guided to undoing everything that you're not and leading you back to God. And it's all about changing your perception and about developing this contact, this communication with your higher self. And yeah, so when I was reading that, it just reminded me of whenever I have felt lost in my life, or whenever things have not panned out correctly, or things are not going well, or even when they are, it's like there is always this internal calling that's like, turn inwards, turn inwards, turn inwards, and dive deep in that. And I feel like I have had a lot of things throughout my life that I was very into for a while, and then I wasn't, and things that I started doing and then just completely dropped. And the course, since I know about it, which I was 8 years old, my mom was introduced to the course, and then I knew about it. And then at 14, I actually started doing the practices myself. It has never left me, and it is something that I do every single day. There's not a single day that I go without thinking about these principles that are now, so embedded in me. And yeah, it's just like I recognize that thing, that nothing in this world will attract you like that. And the bigger word for that for me is, it's that internal growth, that internal true self that you are, that is calling to you in this moment, who are the self that is not remembering that. And it's just so powerful. And I feel like that call is there for each and every one of us in the different ways. I feel like not everyone has to do A Course in Miracles, by all means. Like, there are so many different practices. But I do believe that if you find a spiritual practice that speaks to you, that, you kind of get your master's degree with it, that you go to town with it and really practice and dive deep into it, because there's so much growth that we do. And I feel like there's a path for everyone, and a beautiful, perfect path for everyone. And yeah, I'm just so excited to share that, because no matter how successful we are in this world, no matter how beautiful external relationships we have or material possessions, there is always like that emptiness that you get to, where it's like, oh, okay, I have everything, or I have nothing. But even though if I had it all, I knew that that would not be it. And this is the symbol of our search for that and our finding of that.
Well said. I really liked how you described the course. Because for me, it's highly psychological. There's a mythology, there's theology. It's a beautiful work of art. It's a symphony, as perhaps Wapnick, Dr. Kenneth Wapnick, who's a great teacher of the course, would say that it is a symphony, because of the way it's written and its iambic pentameter. So yeah, it's very highly specialized and very beautifully well written, but at the same time, it's interesting because a big focus of the course is really Jesus talking to us from one mind to another mind, which is just one mind, about the ego. And so I think for me, what the course represents is that day-to-day observing of my egoic thoughts. Kind of like what you were talking about, Vero, about even in the moments of happiness, is This idea that ultimately we want peace, and if we're seeking outside, then there's obviously this lack within me. And so just monitoring my thoughts on a day-to-day basis, um, that looks at those investments in outcomes, those investments in these things that externally have to happen in order for me to either be happy, or these things that are happening that are making me sad. And so it's just for me, it's just a constant using the course, using the principles, but it's just constantly being vigilant. So it's the course I don't think really focuses on meditation, but it's the daily vigilance. It's almost like a constant meditation.
Meditation of the entire day.
Yeah. And I don't know if you said it, but it's non-dualistic, right? So the metaphysics is one, right, where God is and nothing else is, and what God created can never be destroyed or altered. And then on a practical level, it's about focusing on the relationships, our investments, whether it's a relationship with a person, a loved one, someone you don't really know. It's about working on your own attitudes and investments of these relationships. And it could be objects and animals, like our dear Timo, who's nestled in front of our front door, keeping an eye out for us. But it's a constant examination. Yeah, for me, it's a constant examination of my attitudes towards the relationships that I'm having with everything.
Yeah, it's incredible how the course really harps on the fact that the resolution or the letting go or the transformation of relationships in our everyday life is how, at the level of the macro mind, is how we go back to God. So the teachings that the course presents are not New Age teachings. They're actually very ancient teachings that go back to the Vedanta teachings and the Bhagavad Gita and just Eastern teachings and ancient teachings that are just so rich, right? And I think what the course adapts to it is giving us this roadmap of everyday practice of how do we get back to God, and using the mythology as a way of explaining, okay, how do we separate from God? Why are we here? And how is it that we get back? How is it that we become truly happy? Because if we're truly happy, which for the course is being in the state of perfect peace, then we are back with God. And something that really was like the turning point for me in my study of the course, because I feel that for pretty much the first 8 years of the course is a really big book. It's almost like a Bible size, and it has a theoretical part, it has a workbook lesson part, and for those many first 8 years I was mainly focused on the workbook part and understanding some of the tags, like why the workbook lessons were the way they were. But there was so much about it to discover, because I was still discovering about myself, and I had less resistance to really look and dive deep into the unconscious and see how all those inner workings play out. So the one thing that I remember that really turned my understanding of the course around, and this happened actually after who was my spiritual father and spiritual teacher at that time, he passed. And so for many years I had traveled with him and I had followed his teachings, which were based on A Course in Miracles. But when he left, there were so many things that just didn't add up. Like, I was completely devastated, and it took me to such a low point and at that point, I was already teaching the course. I think this was when I was 18, 19, 20. That's when I started teaching. And then when he passed, I was like 23. But it just left me like in this big abyss. And I realized that I hadn't dove in deep enough yet, right? Because I knew that the course promised you perfect peace. That's the goal of the course, to give you peace, for your mind to reach peace. And I was far from peace in that moment. So it really took me on this road to understanding more, because, you know, at the same time, like, I felt a responsibility. I'm like, I'm giving this, I'm sharing this with people. I have one-on-one people that I'm seeing, and I need this for myself as much as I do for them, to honor the relationship that I have with them. So I went into this really deep dive, and basically went back to like the start, the beginning of how the course came out and where it came from, and the journey of bringing it into the world. It took, 7 years through Helen Schuckman and Bill Thetford, which were psychologists with very prestigious job positions at Columbia University in the 70s. And once I got to studying more in depth, I came to having a much better grasp of the mythology of the course. And basically the mythology of the course says that everything was amazing in heaven, right? We're God's one son, infinite in expansion, not in form, but in this abstract connection of love and joy and light. This is beyond energy, beyond frequencies, like way beyond all of that, in complete unity. And part of God's mind, right, had this thought of, oh, what if I could be special? What if I could be different? And being able to hold that thought, the consequence of having it was this deep experience of guilt, right? Of, oh my God, I have done something against God, and now I have to run away and hide. And then, like, we introduced the concept of the ego, which is the first level of separation from God, where now the son that had the thought, right, is faced with his own denial of God, and now converts it into this third person, the ego, which interprets everything that is going on and basically tells the son, okay, yes, you have separated yourself from God by having that wish, and now you need to hide and you need to run away, right? But this is like totally made up. But because that part of the son of God's mind has as much power as God himself, because it's cut from the same cloth, the same image, that part of God's son's mind believes in the reality of his own thinking. So it totally thinks that his new existence is now in separation to God. And so the ego tells him, yes, you sinned, and now you need to run away because God is going to come get you. Now, because if you feel guilty, you're gonna think that you're going to be punished. So the son makes this pseudo God, which is a punishing God, but God has never been a punishing God, right? So we enter into this dynamic of running away, and the ego tells God's son that the only way that he can run away is if he gives him that guilt, and he's going to make sure that guilt goes far away. And now God's son gets to keep his individual identity, which is what he wanted. He wanted to be unique. He wanted to be special. He wanted to be alone. So, but it's a trick, because if all is one, where is this guilt going to go? It's going to go somewhere else in the mind. So the mythology tells us that what happens is then we have to project a world, right? A world that is still with the same mind, but it's a smoke screen to put the guilt somewhere. And once the guilt is put somewhere, it's the symbolism of what the Big Bang is, right? The creation of the universe, a universe where this guilt can be put away, and now we come into this world as innocent babies that are individual and have nothing to do with this guilt, right? And hang on with me there if you can. I'm almost to the point. But now we find ourselves in this earth, right? And we seem to be attacked by everything. So as soon as a baby comes into the world, it needs oxygen, it needs its mother's milk, it needs the doctor's care. And if it doesn't get that, then it's being affected, it's being attacked by an external force. So, and one of the key parts to the story is that in order for you to believe that, yes, the guilt has been placed somewhere else and now you're an individual without the guilt, there is like this big blanket of denial that has to happen. And in the Course, it's called the veil of oblivion, where you forget about anything that happened before the fabrication of the universe. So you forget about having had that thought of wanting to be separate from God. And now you just find yourself here, right? So that guilt, which was our own, like Luis's wish to be separate, Veronica's wish to be separate, not as Luis and Veronica, but as the macro mind's wish to be separate from God, is now projected out into the world. And it gets projected into relationships. It gets projected to our mom and dad, to our jobs, to the environment, to the heat, where we're always feel like we're on the victim side of things. Sometimes we feel victimizers too, but then we blame our parents for having made us that way, and that's why we are victimizers now. So this is the part that just turned around my entire understanding of the Course, because then I saw the need for forgiveness, right? Like, one of the basic tenets of the Course is, and basically like its sole North Star is this idea of forgiveness. And what forgiveness means for the Course is that all of those relationships where we projected our unconscious guilt from having separated ourselves from God, now we have to see those relationships different. And not so much deny, oh, like, you beat me up. No, you're God's son. You didn't beat me up. Don't worry about it. It's like, okay, yes, you beat me up, but I wanted to be angry at you so I could escape my own guilt, right? So I wouldn't take responsibility and actually return to God. And the kind of the third piece to the story is that alongside the ego and now the separated God Son, there is the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is basically our memory of God, right? It's God's voice speaking in terms that we can understand. And we can speak about this as a presence within you, as like an actual being, Holy Spirit, like however you want to work with that, whatever makes more sense to you. But it is through the Holy Spirit and our invitation of Him into our life that we are able to transform these relationships and see them completely different, where again and again we are guided to forgive our brother for what he never did, still being practical in the world and taking the necessary steps to do whatever it is that we need to do here, but in our minds knowing that we're actually going through a forgiveness process where we're forgiving ourselves for repeating the story again and again in our different relationships of separating ourselves from God. So that was like a long way to go around it, is what really turned my study of the Course around. And then I really felt like I started living it, because I did then what Luis was talking about, which was watching all of my thoughts and everything, that all the judgments that I was having. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. I mean, this Course has many avenues. It's a lot to unpack, and I see how we want to just give it all in one podcast of 35, 45 minutes. So it is kind of funny because the whole methodology of it is one thing, right? There's another word that
Mythology. Or the metaphysics.
the metaphysics is the word that I was thinking of, but yeah. So there's the metaphysics of the course. The God is that nothing that God created can be destroyed, that it's eternal. And then so there's that metaphysics, and then there's another layer which is, the day-to-day practice. And so a big part of all this is also the confusion between those two levels, which I don't know if we want to get into right now, but maybe on a future podcast. But I think it's helpful just to mention that
I think it's totally worth mentioning.
It can get confusing, and if you start reading this course and you're going through the process, let's say your daily lessons, and something comes up like the world I see holds nothing that I want, or what I see is meaningless, and the world isn't real, for example, and then you might go about your day, well, I'm not going to take care of myself, or I'm not going to acknowledge the person on the street, the homeless person asking for money, because this is all a dream and it's not real, so I'm okay with just ignoring them. And so there is that confusion, and I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but there exists.
It doesn't only happen in the course, it happens in many other spiritual practices where the teachings that we're learning are actually a metaphor for something or a symbol for something else that we can't understand, but we take it literal, and in a way is our conniving way of not taking responsibility for ourselves. And sometimes we do it super innocently and without even realizing. But I know, like, for me, and it's I think it's also inevitable. Like, when you're transitioning from thinking that you're a human being here that was put on earth by mom and dad, and we're just here to survive and be at war with everything to make ends meet, to then shifting to this idea that, oh wow, like I'm spirit, or I'm mind, or I have power. So that journey goes through many different avenues that are all viewed through our current perspective. And I think the word for what we're trying to express, and it's kind of like a harsh word, but many people understand it as spiritual bypassing, where we just take these very lofty concepts, like the world is not real, like I'm not a body, like your brother is just a mirror of who you are, to be like, okay, I'm not going to take care of my body, the world's not real, so I'm not going to work, and obviously my brother is my mirror, and he is super attacking me right now, then it must mean that I'm attacking too, right? And it's just not exactly like that. There's levels unpacked there that as you go through your journey, you're like, oh, okay, I understand now. Like, if my brother is attacking, and if I identify with that, on some level I am attacking too, but I could just be viewing it with complete peace, and then it's a reflection of the macro mind, but it's not necessarily a reflection of what I am right now. So then that helps you deal with things more objectively, right? Or, okay, the world is not real, and what gives me my worth is not my involvement with the world, but something much deeper, right? But I'm still going to be in the world and do what I have to do because I seem to be in a body that needs to eat, right? And yeah, I think it's just so part of the journey. And for me, it's really interesting because for a while I was very judgmental of that. But then I just started to just understand, like, oh wow, we're all at a different consciousness level, and we're all in a different part of our journey, and we'll all come home, right? Like, we'll all come to the greater understanding, and my job right now is just to love you and to be able to accept you as much as I possibly can, while keeping my ego in check and observing. And that's all I have to do. Like, I'm not the one that's gonna fix you. Right? But I think it is worth mentioning because sometimes we get really lost in those rabbit holes of spiritual bypassing, and a lot of times, they're very, very detrimental. So, yeah, like you limit yourself so much from what you can actually give.
Yeah, our egos are very good at getting involved in
Yes.
any
Yes.
spiritual or spirituality or whatever
Yeah.
that means to you. And so, just, I guess, a couple of examples. If you're studying this course or whatever spirituality, and then you start thinking that you are better than someone else, or you feel bad, like, wow, I wish they knew about what I know, because I know so much, and this has improved my life so much, and I'm so much advanced, and it's your ego's involved, because the ego speaks first, and it's the one that speaks of separation, of differences, of attack, of, you know, in order to be saved, you have to sacrifice another. It's one or the other. Whereas your other teacher, which here in the course we call the Holy Spirit, teaches us sameness, teaches us peace. Um, Everyone's the same. Love, happiness, peace, shared interests. And so the ego is very insidious.
So insidious.
In reality, the truth is that the ego doesn't really exist. It's really our choice and our belief in the ego that gives us its reality. And so, what's nice about that idea is that within our mind, we're constantly choosing between one or the other. And so, through the process of forgiveness, through kindness, through seeing the other person and recognizing, wow, okay, this person here who I want to be upset at has an ego, but also has the power to choose, has the Holy Spirit within them, and has the choice to choose between the two. And so recognizing that sameness and turning towards your gentle teacher and just being that reflection. Like Vito said earlier, there's nothing that we can do to teach you and have you learn something, but because in reality you are that. But we can be that reflection of truth or light or happiness and love, and just kind of share that, impart that in somehow in words.
Yeah, that's really beautiful because so Ken Wapnick, which is one of the most well-known course teachers that has ever existed. He's already passed, but he was the course's first teacher, and he wrote over 33 books about the course in 30 years. And one of the stories that I remember the most from his lecture, that struck me the most, because I was like, wow, like how practical is that? He said, kids don't remember what their teacher taught them. Kids remember how they were taught too. Like, was it with love? Was that teacher this always angry teacher? Or that was always reprimanding them? Or were they kind? Were they loving? Were they compassionate? Were they understanding? And it was like, wow, like, yes. So it's like, regardless of whether I study spirituality, like A Course in Miracles, and you study, I don't know, say Seventh-day Adventist, or the Quran, or something like that, I think that lesson applies to all of us, because people don't change unless they really want to. And it is the way in which someone tells you something what you really receive. Yeah, like regardless of what their words are, you're receiving either the love that they're giving it to you with, and that love is speaking to the love that's already within you, or you're receiving beyond their words the hate or the judgment, or the fear that they're telling you something, and you're believing that for yourself, right? And I feel like, that teaching through love, which at sometimes, like, it doesn't mean the external manifestation of it always has to be super loving, but the content of it, I think like parents can be firm with us, but still be very loving, right? And that's what communicates, that's what really teaches, and that's what empowers another human being to go on that journey, of self-discovery.
Yeah. I was just talking to Mrs. Malloy. She was my health magnet teacher. She, I know she's shining and smiling. I got my nursing assistant license because of her in high school. And it's interesting as you were speaking, when you talked about that firmness, but also the content, she was very firm. She was very tough. But I experienced the love because I know that she cared for all of us and she wanted us to be better. And so, yeah, when I think of that firm but gentle and loving teacher whose content was all love, it reminds me of Mrs. Malloy. So,
yeah, it's so beautiful because this is something that, like, a lot of times we want to give, right? And so we think that it's in words or in these, like, I don't know, you speak at a podium and it's some great event and that's where you're going to give the most. But it is just in the way you are. Like, there's this lesson that says, I'm the light of the world, right? And it's not like, oh, I'm the super bomb of the world, look at me. No, it's like you carry that love of God within you, and no matter whether you're at the grocery store, whether you're sending the mail, just you being in that recognition, which means you're saying no to your ego judgments that are coming in and just letting them go because they're meaningless, then you're communicating so much in that moment, and that is like so powerful and so fulfilling. And I think our need for spirituality today is as great as it's ever been. But I think more and more younger people are coming to searching deeper because they're realizing that just basing themselves and their lives and their happiness on form alone is not fulfilling whatsoever. Like, since we're born, we're taught, okay, you go to school, you learn, you get a good job, you find a good husband, you find a good wife, you have your kids, and it's all external. It's all about things we make.
Things and you live happily ever after.
Yeah, exactly. things we do, and it's such a path. Like, I lost my dad. He was killed when I was 4 years old, and I feel like that was one of the greatest gifts that's ever happened in my life. And not because, oh, I got rid of my dad, but because it took me to a point of pain very, very deep, very, very early on in my life. And I was able to see the futility of it all, like how devastating it was, and how could that happen if an all-loving God existed? And so it put me in that path, and to this day, like, no matter, I work as an interior designer, I'm a translator, I'm building a food brand with a business partner, like, no matter what I do, I always come back to my spiritual practice. It's like it's the source that gives life, that gives purpose to everything else. And I think it's just, yeah, like, I could not get away from that because it's what gives me meaning, for real.
Yeah, it's a sense of grounding for me to be able to, monitor my thoughts on a day-to-day basis. It's similar to why I exercise and I train my body. I think is equally, if not more important, to train your mind in a systematic way.
Yeah.
To identify, and that's the process. Other spiritualities focus on that's maybe the new age stuff, like just being in the present moment. This spirituality to me has come to signify really looking at all your hateful thoughts and all your crazy thoughts and all your misperceptions and all your judgments and anxieties, and asking for help, asking for that teacher of love to say, hey, can you look at this with me? And you don't necessarily have to do anything else. And I think that's why, for me, it's so vital. I might not necessarily wake up in the morning and reach for my lesson. I may start doing the things that I normally do as a body, since I think I am a body and I'm here. But I do try not to let my mind just go off about all the million things that I need to do. It's a moment for me of quietness and peace and just allowing myself to kind of integrate myself into the new day.
How am I going to go about learning in my classroom today?
Exactly.
Yeah. How am I going to have forgiveness be first and forefront in my thinking?
And seeing that everything that happens to you is just another opportunity, it's just another classroom for you to look with that help, with that right mind, to see things a little differently.
It's beautiful because I think the bigger message for me is that really diving into your spiritual practice, whatever that may be, ultimately will get you to a place where you have peace regardless of whatever is going on around you. And I feel like that was like this pinnacle idea that I saw in the course that I was like, oh my God, like I want that. Because I realized, how fluctuating this world is. And one moment we have, and then the next moment we don't have. And then I like my body, and then I don't like my body. And then I like my job, or I don't like my clients, or this and that. And it's always shifting. But this idea that there is a place in you where there's perfect peace, and you can go to that, right? And when you do that, and then you come back to whatever it is that you're doing, it's like it's completely shifted. Because you're different, because you allowed yourself to be undone, for that thought of separation in that moment to be undone. And by you saying yes, it's like you went back to God. And it's as simple as that in the most meager situations that you may be in, but it's like that huge.
Yes, our time is up.
It is. Our time is almost up. Well, this has been lovely.
Yeah.
I think we definitely need to do it again.
I mean, this almost felt like just an instant in time. I mean, it's like, wow, 43, almost 45 minutes have passed.
Yeah. It's so fulfilling to be able to share this with you. And I'm so grateful. We were basically together because of our mutual interest in A Course in Miracles. I don't think our relationship would have survived had it been otherwise. And it continues to grow. Like, it's amazing. Like, we continue to learn every single day. And it's just, it only gets richer.
Yeah, one of the best things you can do if you're in a relationship or with any relationship that you have is to work on your own self.
Yeah.
And just be kind, just be loving and gentle and understanding.
Yes. And that'll give freedom to the other person to find themselves and to find that same kindness within them. Yeah, like you don't have to be in the same spiritual path. You just have to love each other. And sometimes it's hard to do, but it's like the only thing, like what else are you going to do? What else is really going to put you forward?
And just a little willingness to you know, not be right, to let go, to surrender.
Yeah, indeed. All right, guys. See you next time. Hope you tune in. Hope this was helpful.